I hope everyone's doing well. Let's get right into it. I've been playing around with some basic numbers, and it seems that unless we can do a lockdown until there's a vaccine or a treatment, the lockdown is going to be completely useless, basically. So it'll be basically, in effect, doing way more harm than good. So we might as well not have a lockdown at all. Now, please don't cuss me out yet. But of course, afterwards, please feel free to leave your comments as well, because I want to hear from other people, like what they think, and maybe there's some different point of view or different logics I've overlooked. But in this case, let's have a quick look at the numbers I've used and things. So let's say in an imaginary country with like 100 million people, right? Let's say there's a 10,000 available ICU or intensive care units, or the capability of taking care of 10,000 seriously ill people from COVID, right? So there are other diseases as well, but let's say there's 10,000 units for just COVID patients. So this doesn't just mean ventilators, but also, you need to have a bed, you need a team of medical professionals to take care of them, because it's not just a matter of just plugging them into a ventilator and leaving them. You have to monitor the ventilator, change the settings, clean them, just look after them. So let's just say 10,000 for now. We can of course tweak the numbers later on, because I put it into an Excel sheet, and you can with a formula, so you can just plug in any numbers you want. Now let's make another assumption that out of all the infected people, 2% will fall into the life-threatening, need ventilator, need intensive care to live. Otherwise, they will definitely die, right? So let's say maybe 90% would have no symptom or mild symptom, might be coughing or sneezing a bit, have a bit of temperature. And maybe another 8% have serious condition, but not life-threatening. They might be lying, feel like they're going to die for a few days, be seriously ill, but in the end they'll recover, But obviously it would be nice if they had gone to the hospital to alleviate that pain and misery. Maybe they can give you some IVs or some medication to help with the pain and stuff to make you feel a bit better. But if you really had to stay home, you wouldn't have died in the end. I'm sure most of us have been there, where maybe we have a severe case of diarrhea or food poisoning or the flu and things, and we're like, we're just lying in bed dying for 3 days, and then we come back. So let's just say 2% would definitely die without any medical treatment. In this case, if 500,000 people get infected, 10,000 would need to be, you fall into the seriously life-threateningly ill category. So basically, they will take up 10,000 ICU beds. So that's basically all the available intensive care units that's available. Now, let's say each case takes 14 days to resolve. So after 14 days, those that get better, and the rest that doesn't make it, well, they die, basically. So in this case, if 500,000 people get infected, then 10,000 of them would need all the ICU beds for 14 days. Then after 14 days, all the cases are resolved, and all the ICU beds are available again. So another 500,000 people can now be infected, and without, overloading the healthcare system, basically. So if we do a lockdown and keep the infection rate at 500,000 people every 2 weeks, then we would basically flatten the curve to a point where, everyone who needs intensive care unit will get one. With these numbers or these assumptions, for 100 million people to be infected without overloading the healthcare system, it would take doing the lockdown for 2,800 days, or basically about 7.5 years of lockdown. Let's just say we only need to get half the population infected before herd immunity kicks in, which some theory suggests. That would still take 3.5 years, which I think pretty much everyone agrees that we probably can't do a lockdown for 3 years, or even 1 year for that matter. Most people would say, 6 months is just pushing it to the limit, right? And that's for a country of 100 million. So let's say if you're the United States, you have 300 million people, it might take even longer if you only have, 10,000 ICU beds, or basically the ability to take care of 10,000 seriously ill COVID patients. So, let's just say, we probably can't do the lockdown until everyone gets infected. Let's just say if we do the lockdown for 30, 60, or 90 days, how much would that actually help, right? How much would that actually help? So let's have a look at the numbers. For this, we'll make another assumption that for all the people that are seriously ill and going into intensive care and needing ventilators and stuff, about 50% makes it out alive. Again, we can change this number later to see its effect, but from all the reports suggest that about, people who go on ventilators, about half of them make it, right? But of course, we can change it later just to see, like, maybe if the treatment's better and stuff, we can save more people. But for now, let's just say it's 50%. So for 500,000 infections, 10,000 people would go into the ICU with severe, like on ventilators, and about 5,000 people, or half of them, would die, right? So if we do a lockdown for 30 days, about 1 million people will become infected, in 30 days that we're doing the lockdown. And deaths during that lockdown would be about 10,000. So 1 million people get infected in 30 days, about 2%. So about 20,000 would go into the ICU, and about half of them would survive. So only about 10,000 people would die. And then after 30 days, we obviously open the country back up, right? So everyone will become infected in a very short period of time. That's the assumption anyway. So in that case, I just make the assumption that no one can get an ICU bed because there's so many sick people around, right? So basically, 2% of all the people who become critically ill will just die because they don't have an ICU bed. So after 30 days, 1 million people has been infected. That leaves about another 99 million people who are still like just completely haven't been infected yet, have no immunities, right? So once we open the country back up, all the other 99 people will become infected, and then about 2% of them would die. So in total, with a lockdown of 30 days, then opening the country back up, about 1.978 million people would die, basically almost 2 million, right? So that's a total death. Now, total death, if we didn't do any lockdown at all, so we just assume we just spread it to 100 million people straight away, and 2% of them will die because they can't get any ICU bed at all. The health system is completely overwhelmed. In that case, 2 million people would die. So this basically means that even if we just shut everything down, or basically not everything, but the lockdown as we know it right now, with all the restaurant and the mall and the several businesses being shut down, we probably have 1.978 million deaths. But if we do nothing at all and just let life go on as usual, get it over with, that some people suggest, about 2 million people would die. So I mean, I probably leave it up to you if it's worth it or not. Some people will say, hey, that's like 20-something thousand people. It's that's quite a lot of people that we could save. It's probably worth it. But then obviously lockdown it does damage, and it costs lives as well, and livelihood, and well-being. So let's say we do the lockdown for 60 days. So that's 2 months. In 2 months, we probably have about 2 million people infected during the lockdown. And all of these people infected during the lockdown would get the medical care they need, and therefore half of them would survive. So only 21,000 people would die, and then we open up the country back up again. So in this case, about 1.957 million people would die, and again, if we don't do anything, about 2 million people would die. So that's for a 60 days lockdown, right? So how about we try to make the case for lockdown a bit more. Let's say the ICU treatment is actually better than we think. Okay, so more than half the people make it. Let's just say 9 out of 10 people make it. So if you're ill and you are treated well, you have available treatment, 90% of you make it. So percentage of death would be 0.1. So only 10% of people who, even with proper medical care, dies, right? In this case, in 60 days of lockdown, again, the same amount of people will be infected, but only 4,000 people would die. But then we have to open the country back up again. So again, the other 98 million people out of 100 million who haven't been infected yet will become infected very quickly, and basically 2% of them will die because they have no immunities. So about 1.957142 million people would die, even with a very good ICU treatment and doing a lockdown for an entire 60 days, compared to 2 million without doing anything at all. Okay, so let's go even more extreme. Let's say we do a lockdown for 3 entire months, so 90 days. Again, 3 million people will be infected, about 6,000 would die because everyone has, access to the ICU. But then again, afterwards, after 90 days, we would still have to open the country back up. And then 1.935714 million people would still die compared to 2 million if we did nothing. And again, it's probably up to you guys to each person to decide whether, this is worth it or not, I guess. I mean, if your loved one is one of the ones saved, then you might say, yeah, it's worth it. But then again, if your loved one is the one whose life is destroyed by the lockdown, and then you might say it's not worth it. And if there's more people lives being destroyed during the lockdown than being saved, then I know you have to probably make from a decision from a completely detached point of view. So you're like a benevolent being looking down. Maybe you're playing like a SimCity game or something, and you're seeing, just look at it on pure numbers and say which one would be best for the majority of people. So that's probably up to different people who say different things. But okay, for now, let's just say maybe some people will say, hey, but maybe the rate of critically ill people is actually more than 2%. It's actually, this thing is deadlier than that. So okay, let's change the numbers a bit. Let's say that 5% of people become critically ill and needs intensive care. So that'll be 0.05. That means that our lockdown to not overwhelm the medical system would need to be even tighter. So we can only afford to have 200,000 people be infected every 2 weeks now, because obviously 200,000 people infected, 5% of them, so that's 10,000 would need all the ICU beds that we have currently available. So that means that in 90 days, only 1.28 million people would be infected because we have to lock down tighter. And then during the 90 days lockdown, only 6,000 people would die, right, during that 90 days. But again, once we have to open the country back up, about 4.935 million people would still die. So basically, once we have to open the country back up again, now there's still 99 million people who are still haven't been infected, and they will just all get infected very quickly. And basically, no one can get, and most people will not be able to get the intensive care that they need. So all 5% of them would die, right? So we save like 1 million people would be infected while, we have adequate intensive care. And then once we open up again, all the rest of the people will just be infected, and all 5% of them will just die. So we have 4.935 million people dead, compared to if we just basically, get it over with, as some people might say, 5 million people would die. So as you can see with all the scenarios, it just seems that the lockdown is not really going to affect the total number of deaths that much. I mean, right now, obviously, we're seeing on the news, especially with like Sweden and things, that the country that's not locking down very tightly. People are pointing that the number of deaths are higher than their neighbors, right? But that's only during the lockdown period. So once the neighboring country that's doing the lockdown right now, of course, they have a lower death rate. But then eventually, I mean, are you going to lock down until you have a vaccine or until you have a treatment? If that's the case, yeah, then you save a lot more lives by locking down, right? But if you're going to lock down for only 3 months and then opening the country back up again, in the end, the total number of deaths is not going to be that much different at all. So the argument might be that instead of locking down for, let's say, 60 days, destroying a lot of people's livelihood, and then getting almost the same number of deaths anyway, it might be better to just get everything over with without shutting anything down so we can move on with our life. It might be better off that way. You might have a bit more people dying from COVID, but overall, people dying from other things and the livelihood destroy and, the economy and things. I know people probably hate it when you say, let's prioritize the economy. But let's look at it from, a business owner point of view, or someone who's been building up their business for 10, 20 years. So they may be in their 50 or 40, they've worked hard for 20 years building up their business. And if you give them a choice between, okay, you can just lock down and your business will be totally destroyed. You have to start over from scratch, right? Or risking 2% chance of dying, or let's say 3% or 4% chance of dying, for you not to waste 20 years of your life. Most people in that situation would probably just, hey, just risk it. I'll risk 2%, 3% chance of dying for not wasting the last 10, 20 years of my life building up a business, or to have it completely be destroyed and my life left in ruin and starting from nothing back up again. You know what I mean? I mean, when you're 50-year-old, you build your business from when you were 30, work hard for 20 years, and to start all over again at 50-year-old, then you're not the same as when you were 30, 20 or 30 anymore. You probably don't have the energy or the health to try and fight back. So a lot of people would just take a gamble, 5% chance of dying. Okay, fine. It's worth the last 20 years of my life or whatever. That's one view to look at it. And the others, there's might be some other argument as well. The problem I see right now is that the politicians or the people making the decision doesn't seem to have a plan, which is probably not surprising, if you know politicians. But if they had said, you say, okay, let's say we didn't know what this was, we didn't know how bad it was going to be, so we're just going to lock everything down for 1 month just to give us time to prepare and to think, to assess the situation, have a meeting with the hospitals, prepare, get more ventilators, get as many ICU beds as possible, get as many medical care staff as possible. And then after that, once we can prepare as best we can, we're going to, just open back up the country and then let the situation run its course. Then I'm fine with that. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable plan. You just present your data and stuff. Or they could say, okay, we're going to lock down until there's a vaccine or the treatment. But right now, what it seems is just politicians just okay, we don't know what to do. We have to be seen to be doing something. So let's just first declare a state of emergency. When that doesn't really do anything. And then, okay, now we start locking down some non-essential businesses. And then, okay, we've got to do something more. Okay, we're going to lock down all the businesses. And that doesn't seem to be a proper plan in place. It's more like the typical politician fashion, The only thing politicians care about, or the most important thing, is their popularity and their re-election. So it's unsurprising that they've made the decision they made, because they have to be seen as doing something, right? And on top of that, the lockdown is not affecting them personally or career-wise. Personally, they're not own some business. They're not running out of money to pay rent and pay their staff. Their job is secure, and if anything, crisis are the best thing that could happen to their political career. You see it time and time again, right? I mean, when you're managing a crisis, you're on television every day. If you can just speak well, you give an air of confidence. You're able to show your leadership, although it's not very real. It's more just like an image of a leadership, really, to be honest. If you could just, present data logically, your popularity is going to shoot up. And then this is what, if I was a politician, these are the times I would live for. I get to manage something important and, look presidential and do something important, instead of managing, a budget for bridge repair or street cleaning. Now you're managing a national crisis. And if you have ambition to run for president or something, or a prime minister, this is like the best thing ever. So that's why it just annoys me a little bit right now, where in pretty much every single country right now, I'm sure in your country as well, every day there will just be a government official or a politician that comes on the TV and say, report the latest number. Oh, okay, right, today we have 3,000 new infections and 100 deaths or whatever. And we just look at it every single day, and maybe they'll go, oh, the number is starting to flatten a bit, or the numbers are starting to go down. Well, again, that's great, but it's not real, basically, because unless you're going to do a lockdown till there's a vaccine or a treatment, or if you can lock down till like it all goes away, right? Then that doesn't matter, because you're just going to have to open the country back up again, and then these numbers mean nothing, because then everyone would just get infected and it would just be almost the same as if you haven't locked down at all. So I mean, it almost seems like they're just locking down, just hoping that this thing just go away on its own, which I think most of us would agree that, it probably wouldn't, unless we just open the country up and let it run its course. I mean, unless we can just freeze everybody in place for the whole entire world, just freeze in place for, let's say, 2 months, then there's a chance that everyone who was sick would die or get better, and then after 2 months, everyone come back out and the COVID is gone, right? But in reality, you probably can't do that, because what about your power supply, your electricity? Someone's got to do maintenance on that. Water, water supply. And people who are sick, ill with heart diseases, they can't wait for an operation for like 2 months. So in the end, you can't really lock down 100% anyway. So even if only a few cases are left after your lockdown, it's just going to spread, all over again very, very quickly, because this thing all started with, I'm sure, only like a few cases, and then spread throughout the whole world. Now you have millions of people infected. So even if you lock down for 3 months and then you come back out, the numbers are really low. But then when you open back up again, if there's like 10 people left infected, it's just going to spread like wildfire again. So I don't know, it seems that just by playing around with the numbers, it seems that like lockdown to me, with these calculations, doesn't seem to me, wouldn't help that much if you can't lock down until you see a vaccine or a virus, or a treatment, sorry. So, but again, I'm just wondering about what everybody else is thinking, because maybe I'm missing something. My models are pretty basic, to be honest, but right now the data set we have, it's just so sparse and not detailed enough really to do any detailed modeling or whatever. I think that would be pretty difficult. So, but even just like these basic back of the napkin calculation, we can probably kind of see roughly kind of the things that the amount of people the lockdown would help. Even these basic assumption, and these are quite wide variation. You can even make the assumption that like 10% would need the ICU, then you would just have to lock down tighter, and then so that means that less people will be infected during the lockdown. But then in the end, when you open the country back up again, it's just going to be pretty much the same death toll in total anyway. So I don't know what you guys think. I guess there are probably people who are extremely against this idea, and also people who might be suffering right now from a lockdown and just saying just hell with it, just open and get it over with as well. So I'm just wondering like what other people think. But for me, obviously, after playing around with the numbers, it might be a case where, okay, just if you want to work, if you want to open up your business, that's up to you. And like, let's say for me, if I have like older parents, I'll probably just in quarantine myself and try to avoid going out as much as possible. But then for other people who wants to work, then it might be just just best to just let them go out and just do their work and get on with business as usual. And for those who doesn't feel safe, then they have the right to also stay at home and quarantine themselves as well. I guess that's why I'm kind of leaning towards right now. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to rant about for today. I don't know, maybe I'll make another video to rant about something else, because to be honest, that's not much to do during these times. So maybe just venting and ranting might be the best solution out of this crisis. Okay, that's it.